You begin with a quiet assumption. Whatever is real, you think, must be nameable. If something truly exists, it should submit to definition. This belief feels reasonable. It supports science, language, and everyday communication. Yet the moment you examine it closely, uncertainty appears. Every definition seems to point to something, but never fully contain it. Each word explains, but also limits. Ibn Arabi entered this problem directly. He did not begin by denying reason or knowledge. Instead, he asked a more unsettling question. What if the deepest level of reality cannot be captured by names at all? What if language, which gives clarity to ordinary things, becomes an obstacle when applied to what is most fundamental? If reality resists naming, what exactly are you grasping when you say you understand it? Ibn Arabi lived in a world shaped by structured thought. Theology sought precision. Philosophy aimed for coherence. Scholars debated definitions with great seriousness, believing that clarity of language led to clarity of truth. Ibn Arabi did not stand outside this tradition. He was trained within it. He understood its power, but he noticed something others overlooked. Knowledge based on concepts depends on distinction. To know something is to separate it from something else. This works well when the subject is limited. It fails when the subject is absolute. Ibn Arabi observed that when thinkers tried to apply the same method to ultimate reality, contradictions multiplied. Not because reality was inconsistent, but because the method was misplaced. He repeatedly asked whether conceptual knowledge and direct recognition were the same. Is knowing about something equivalent to knowing it? Or does conceptual knowledge quietly replace reality with a mental substitute? If all knowledge relies on categories, what happens when the subject has no edges, no opposite, no outside? Does knowledge expand to meet reality, or does it collapse under its own assumptions? You often assume that understanding begins with a stable observer. There is you, and there is what you know. This separation feels obvious. But Ibn Arabi questioned the starting point. He asked whether the self you rely on is as solid as it appears. When you look closely, the self is not fixed. Thoughts change. Roles change. Beliefs change. Even the sense of identity shifts over time. Yet you speak as if there is a permanent center behind all these changes. Ibn Arabi argued that this center is assumed, not discovered. It is a useful idea, but not an established fact. The attempt to name reality depends on this assumption. You believe there is a stable knower who can stand apart from what is known. But if the knower is also part of reality, the separation collapses. The subject trying to define reality is itself one of the things being defined. This creates a subtle problem. If the observer is unstable, how reliable are its conclusions? If the I shifts, what does it mean to say, I know? Where does certainty come from if the one who claims it cannot be fixed? Language feels like access to reality. It allows you to communicate, analyze, and organize experience. Ibn Arabi did not deny this function. He accepted that words are effective within their proper scope. But he also insisted that language works by exclusion. Every word draws a boundary. It says this and not that. Reality, as Ibn Arabi understood it, does not operate by boundaries. When you name something, you separate it from what it is not. This separation exists in thought, not necessarily in reality itself. The mistake occurs when linguistic clarity is mistaken for ontological accuracy. You begin to believe that because a word is precise, it captures what is real. Ibn Arabi pointed out that the more comprehensive the subject, the less adequate language becomes. Words multiply, explanations grow longer, yet understanding does not deepen proportionally. The effort to define reality begins to distort it. If every statement relies on distinction, and reality is not divided in this way, can any statement truly describe it? Or do words only describe perspectives while reality itself remains untouched? Ibn Arabi proposed a radical idea. Reality is one, yet it appears as many. This is not poetry. It is a logical claim about perspective. What you experience as multiplicity depends on the position from which you observe. Different viewpoints reveal different aspects, not different realities. Multiplicity does not contradict unity. It expresses it under conditions of limitation. When you focus on parts, unity seems absent. When you step back from fixation, coherence returns. The error arises when appearances are treated as independent truths rather than partial disclosures. You usually assume that difference implies separation. Ibn Arabi challenged this assumption. He argued that diversity does not require fragmentation. It only requires limited perception. The same reality can be encountered through countless forms without becoming multiple in essence. This idea unsettles habitual thinking. It asks you to reconsider whether disagreement, difference, and diversity necessarily point to conflict at the level of reality itself. If multiplicity is dependent on perspective, what happens when perspective is no longer taken as absolute? You may believe that deeper understanding comes from accumulating more ideas, more explanations, more theories. Ibn Arabi suggested something counterintuitive. He argued that insight often begins when concepts fail. Knowledge organizes experience. It creates maps. These maps are useful, but they are not the territory they describe. Recognition occurs when you realize the difference. When explanations reach their limit, you do not necessarily gain a new concept. Instead, your relationship to thinking changes. Ibn Arabi did not dismiss intellect. He placed it in context. Thinking is valuable until it claims total authority. When it does, it obscures what it cannot contain. Recognition is not ignorance. It is awareness of what resists reduction. This creates a subtle shift. You stop demanding that reality conform to your categories. You allow understanding to include its own limits. The question changes from what is reality to what is thinking capable of. If insight appears when concepts fall away, what role does thinking ultimately play? Ibn Arabi often spoke of divine names. This language is easily misunderstood. He did not mean fixed labels applied to an object called God. He meant functional perspectives through which reality becomes intelligible. Each name reveals a relation. It highlights one mode of understanding. None of them describe essence. When names are treated as definitions, contradiction appears. One name seems to negate another. But Ibn Arabi argued that this conflict dissolves when names are understood as viewpoints rather than claims of completeness. No single name exhausts what it refers to. Each reveals something and conceals something else. This is not a flaw. It is a structural necessity. Total disclosure through language is impossible. The tension between naming and unknowability is not meant to be resolved. It is meant to be recognized. If every name both reveals and limits, what would completeness even mean? Would it be a final definition or the absence of the need for one? You are accustomed to thinking in terms of separation. There is a subject who knows, and an object that is known. Ibn Arabi argued that this division is practical, not ultimate. It allows daily functioning. It does not describe reality at its deepest level. When examined closely, the separation weakens. The knower is not independent of what is known. Awareness does not stand outside reality observing it. It operates within it. This does not eliminate experience. It reframes it. Knowing is no longer possession. It becomes participation, not emotional involvement, but ontological involvement. The act of knowing is itself part of what exists. This challenges certainty based on distance. If knowledge depends on separation, and separation is provisional, then certainty must also be provisional. This realization does not lead to confusion. It leads to humility. You stop assuming that clarity requires distance. You begin to see that involvement does not necessarily distort understanding. If separation is only a convenience, what happens to claims built upon it? Ibn Arabi did not celebrate confusion. He rejected vague thinking. What he advocated was disciplined unknowing. A refusal to claim closure where none is possible. To assert total comprehension is, in his view, a conceptual error. It replaces reality with confidence. True rigor lies in knowing where thought must stop to remain honest. This stopping point is not an ending. It is an alignment. Unknowing is not the absence of knowledge. It is the recognition of excess. Reality exceeds what thought can contain. Acknowledging this is not weakness. It is precision. This perspective reshapes intellectual ambition. Instead of striving for final answers, you strive for accurate questions. Instead of defending conclusions, you examine assumptions. If honesty requires admitting limits, how much of what you currently call knowledge survives that admission? If reality cannot be named, life does not lose meaning. It loses rigidity. Ibn Arabi's perspective does not paralyze action. It refines it. You still decide. You still judge. But you do so without pretending that your conclusions are absolute. Certainty becomes provisional. Not weak, but flexible. You respond rather than cling. This changes how you relate to disagreement. Difference no longer threatens truth. It reveals perspective. Living without final definitions does not remove responsibility. It deepens it. You become responsible not only for actions, but for the assumptions behind them. You recognize that conclusions are tools, not truths. This way of living demands attentiveness. Not emotional intensity, but intellectual care. If no definition is final, how do you choose? You choose with awareness of limitation. You act without claiming ultimate authority. Is this not a more honest way to live? At the end of this inquiry, Ibn Arabi offers no replacement doctrine. He does not exchange one system for another. What remains is clarity without fixation. You recognize that reality does not require your definitions to exist. Understanding does not require closure to be meaningful. Thought relaxes its demand for dominance, not because it has failed, but because it has completed its task. There is no final answer here. There is no silence imposed for dramatic effect. There is simply the recognition that not everything needs to be resolved to be understood. The original question remains, but it no longer demands conquest. You began by asking whether reality could be named. You end by seeing that naming was never the point. When nothing needs to be captured to be acknowledged, what remains to be solved?